The little girl's hands were so small, they barely wrapped around the thick denim of his cut. He looked down, the skull patch of the Hell's Angels staring back from his own chest, a fearsome emblem that sent grown men scurrying. But the child, no older than 6, with eyes like 2 terrified pools of winter sky, just tugged harder, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper that cut through the rumble of idling Harleys at the gas station. He's gonna hurt Mommy. Jericho Kane, known to the world as Wreck, president of the charter, felt a familiar, cold dread coil in his gut. It was a ghost he'd been outrunning for 20 years, and it had just reappeared in the form of a tiny girl with scraped knees and a tear-streaked face. He knelt, the worn leather of his pants groaning in protest, bringing his massive, tattooed frame down to her level. The scent of gasoline and old leather mixed with the faint, sweet smell of a child's shampoo. He saw past her fear to the raw, unadulterated truth in her gaze. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a plea. "Who's gonna hurt her, little one?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, purposefully softened so as not to spook her further. "Sterling," she sobbed, the name catching in her throat. "He's yelling again." He locked the door, but I got out the window. Rex's eyes, chips of flint under heavy brows, flickered to his sergeant-at-arms, Silas Grit Jones, who was watching the exchange with a grim stillness. Grit's hand instinctively went to the hilt of the knife on his belt. Rex gave a subtle shake of his head. Not yet. He looked back at the girl, whose name he would soon learn was Maisie. In her face, he saw his sister, Sarah. He saw her at 16, with a black eye she'd tried to hide with makeup, swearing she'd just walked into a door. He saw her at 19, with a fractured wrist she claimed came from a fall down the stairs. He had been young then, just a prospect, full of impotent rage he didn't know how to channel. He believed her lies because he wanted to, because the alternative was a darkness he wasn't ready to face. By the time he was ready, by the time he'd earned his patch and the respect that came with it, it was too late. Sarah was gone, another statistic swallowed by the silence that abusers count on. He would not let that silence claim another. "You did good getting out," Rex told Maisie, his voice firm but gentle. "You're the bravest girl I've ever met. Where's your house?" She pointed a trembling finger down the street, to a row of pristine suburban homes with manicured lawns and 2 car garages. A place where monsters could hide in plain sight, behind picket fences and closed curtains. It was always the quietest streets that hid the loudest screams. Inside one of those perfect houses, Cora was backed into the corner of the kitchen, the cold tile a stark contrast to the burning fear licking up her spine. Sterling Croft, her partner, the man who had wooed her with poetry and promises, was pacing like a caged panther. His handsome face, the one that charmed investors and city council members, was twisted into an ugly mask of fury. "Where is she, Cora?" he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "Where did your little brat run off to?" Cora's heart hammered against her ribs. She had boosted Maisie through the small bathroom window just minutes before, a desperate gamble born from the look in Sterling's eyes, a look she'd come to recognize. It was the precursor to a storm, the dead calm before the violence. "I don't know," she lied, her voice surprisingly steady. She had learned to sound calm when she was most terrified. It sometimes de-escalated things. "Not today." "Don't lie to me," he roared, slamming his fist into the drywall next to her head. Plaster dust snowed down onto her hair. She didn't flinch. Flinching only made it worse, made it a game for him. She remembered the beginning, the whirlwind romance. He'd been her savior after her husband had passed, a pillar of strength. But the pillar had slowly become a cage. It started with small things, a criticism of her friends, a suggestion she quit her job to be home more, a casual monitoring of her phone. Then came the isolation, the jealousy, the first time he'd gripped her arm hard enough to leave a 5-finger bruise. He'd apologized so profusely, cried even, swearing it would never happen again. That was the abuser's cycle, the cruelest trick of all. The sliver of hope that the man she fell in love with was still in there, that he could be saved. But he couldn't. The man she loved was a phantom, a carefully constructed facade for the monster that now stood before her. "She couldn't have gone far," he muttered, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He walked to the front window, peering out. His arrogance was his shield. He was Sterling Croft, a local real estate magnate, untouchable. Who would a little girl run to? What could she possibly do? He saw nothing but a quiet afternoon street. He had no idea that a different kind of storm was gathering, a storm of chrome and steel and righteous fury. Rex stood up, his decision made. He took off his own cut, the heavy leather vest that was his second skin, and wrapped it gently around Maisie's small shoulders. It swallowed her whole, the demonic skull on the back a strange guardian angel. "Grit," he commanded, his voice back to its usual iron authority. "Stay with her. Don't let anyone near." Grit nodded, his expression unreadable as he scooped Maisie up. The little girl, surprisingly, didn't fight it. She buried her face in Grit's shoulder, clinging to the leather. "What about a lollipop?" Grit asked gruffly, pulling one from his pocket. He always kept them for his own grandkids. "Red or blue?" Rex swung a leg over his roaring Harley, the engine a deep-throated growl that vibrated through the pavement. He keyed his comms. "All hands. Code red." There was no explanation. None was needed. A code red meant a woman or a child was in danger. It was the one call that superseded everything. Across the county, phones buzzed. A biker named Beast, elbow deep in an engine block, wiped his hands and was on his bike in 30 seconds. Another, preacher, was in a church meeting. He simply stood up, nodded to the pastor, and walked out. In bars, homes, and on highways, the call was answered. One by one, then in pairs, then in groups, the thunder began to build. It was the sound of a promise being kept, a promise Rec had made to his sister's memory long ago. Never again. From every direction, they converged on Sycamore Lane, a rolling tide of vengeance. Sterling was growing more agitated, his search becoming frantic. He tore through Maisie's room, overturning her toy box, ripping her small drawings from the wall. Each one was a colorful, innocent depiction of a happy family. A smiling mother, a smiling girl, and a stick figure man who bore no resemblance to the monster he was. The sight enraged him further. It was a lie. He saw a muddy footprint near the back door, and his rage solidified into a cold certainty. She had escaped. He stormed back to the kitchen, grabbing Cora by the hair and yanking her head back. "You helped her," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "You think you're clever. You think you could defy me in my own house." Cora closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable. The pain was a familiar fire, but this time, it was different. This time, there was a flicker of hope. Maisie was out. Maisie was free. Whatever happened to her now, she had bought her daughter a chance. "There is nowhere you can run where I won't find you," Sterling whispered, his voice a venomous promise. "There is no one who will help you, who would believe you over me. I own this town. I own you." It was then that the low rumble started. At first, it was faint, a distant vibration he might have mistaken for a passing truck. But it didn't pass. It grew, deepening, multiplying, a ground-shaking tremor that rattled the windows in their frames. Sterling frowned, releasing Cora to look outside again. What he saw made the blood drain from his face. The street was no longer empty. It was filled, curb to curb, with motorcycles. Dozens of them. They sat there, engines idling in a terrifying, synchronized symphony of power. On each bike sat a man clad in leather, their faces grim, their eyes all fixed on his house. They weren't just passing by. They had stopped. They were waiting. The illusion of his perfect, controlled world shattered in an instant. The silence was the most unnerving part. No shouts, no revving engines for show. Just the oppressive, collective rumble and the weight of 50 pairs of eyes. They had surrounded the house, a silent, leather-clad siege line. The neighbors, who had for so long pretended not to hear the shouting, were now glued to their windows, witnessing a power shift they couldn't comprehend. Sterling's fortress had been breached, not by force, but by presence alone. His authority, built on money and carefully cultivated fear, meant nothing to the men outside. He was a king in a castle, and the barbarians were not at the gates. They had materialized inside the walls. Rex swung off his bike and walked toward the front door, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the pristine concrete walkway. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He moved with the inexorable certainty of a glacier. He stopped at the polished oak door and knocked. Just a simple, polite knock. It was so much more menacing than kicking it down. Inside, Sterling was frozen, caught between his rage and a primal fear he hadn't felt in years. The knock jolted him. He glanced at Cora, who was watching him with a newfound strength in her eyes. The fear was still there, but it was now laced with defiance. She had called the storm, and it had come. Enraged by her expression, by his own sudden powerlessness, Sterling yanked the door open, his face a mask of indignation. "What the hell do you think you're?" His words died in his throat. He was looking up at Jericho Wreck Kane. Wreck was a wall of man, his face a roadmap of hard miles and harder fights. The club tattoos snaked up his neck, and his eyes held a chilling calm, the kind that promised absolute violence. Behind him, Sterling could see the others, an army of impassive, unforgiving faces. "Sterling Croft," Rex said. It wasn't a question. "We're here for Cora and Maisie. They're leaving with us." Sterling's bravado, his only remaining weapon, sputtered to life. "You're on private property. I'll have you all arrested. Get the hell off my lawn before I call the police." Rek didn't even blink. "Go ahead. Call them. We'll wait." From behind Rek, Grit stepped forward, holding a small, pink backpack. He opened it and pulled out a stuffed teddy bear, its fur matted with what looked like dried blood. He held it up. "Maisie dropped this when she climbed out the window," Grit said, his voice flat. "Looks like Teddy had a little accident. Walked into a door, maybe?" The dark humor was a blade twisting in Sterling's gut. They knew. They knew everything. The carefully constructed facade of his life was being torn down in front of the entire neighborhood. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning. He saw Cora moving behind him, a shadow detaching from the wall. His control snapped. He lunged, grabbing her arm, pulling her in front of him like a shield. "She's not going anywhere," he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's mine." That was the last mistake he would ever make in that house. The word mine was a spark in a powder keg. Rex's eyes went from cold steel to burning embers. He didn't give an order, but the line of bikers surged forward as one, a silent, unstoppable wave. They flowed past him, into the house, a tide of black leather and grim purpose. It was over in seconds. Sterling was a man used to fighting smaller, weaker people. He was no match for men who treated violence as a language. He was disarmed, subdued, and hauled out onto his perfect lawn, his expensive suit ripped, his face a canvas of shock and pain. He wasn't beaten senseless, but he was broken in a far more profound way. His power, his control, his very identity had been stripped from him. He was left kneeling on his own grass, utterly defeated, as the neighbors he once lorded overwatched in stunned silence. Grit went to Cora, who was trembling, leaning against the doorframe. He didn't touch her. He just stood near, a silent sentinel. "He won't hurt you again, ma'am," he said softly. Then Rek was there, holding the cut he had given Maisie. He held it out to Cora. "This is yours now," he said. "You're under our protection." From the crowd of bikes, a small figure darted forward. Maisie, who had been kept safe at the end of the street, ran past the chrome giants and threw herself in her mother's arms. Cora collapsed to her knees, hugging her daughter tightly, her sobs finally breaking free, not of fear, but of overwhelming relief. The sirens began to wail in the distance, a belated response. Rek had made the call himself, to a detective who owed him a favor, a man who understood there were different kinds of justice. When the police arrived, they found Sterling Croft tied up with his own silk neckties and a conveniently placed, unlocked briefcase in his study containing evidence of financial crimes that would put him away for a long, long time. The bikers were gone, melting back into the city as quietly as they had arrived, leaving only the scent of exhaust and the legend of what they had done. Months passed. The story of the day 50 bikers laid siege to Sycamore Lane became a local myth, whispered in hushed, awed tones. For Cora and Maisie, it was the beginning of a new life. Sterling was buried under a mountain of legal trouble, his reputation and freedom gone forever. Cora, with the club's help, found a new apartment on the other side of town. Rec had offered her cash, a blank check to start over somewhere far away, but she had refused. "Running is what he made me do," she'd said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard it. "I'm done running." Instead, she took a job. Grit, who owned a custom bike shop that served as a legitimate front for the club, hired her to manage the books. At first, she was timid, a ghost moving through a world of loud noises and rough men. But she watched and she learned. She saw the fierce loyalty, the unwavering code of brotherhood. These men, who looked so terrifying to the outside world, were the gentlest souls she had ever known, especially with Maisie, who became the club's unofficial mascot. They taught her how to stand tall, how to speak with conviction, how to change the oil on a panhead. She found a strength she never knew she possessed, forged in trauma, but tempered by kindness. One crisp autumn evening, a year after the rescue, Cora stood in the garage, grease on her hands, a confident smile on her face. The sound of a perfectly tuned engine filled the air. She was sitting astride a vintage Harley, one she had helped Grit rebuild from the frame-up. Its chrome gleamed under the shop lights, a stark contrast to the bruised shadows she used to live in. Rec leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He saw no trace of the broken woman from that day, only a survivor, vibrant and powerful. Maisie sat on a nearby stool, drawing in a sketchbook, not of stick figures, but of a queen with a wrench for a scepter, surrounded by 50 leather-clad knights. Cora twisted the throttle, and the engine roared, a triumphant, defiant sound. It was the sound of her freedom, a sound she now controlled. The roar echoed into the night, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most heroic angels don't have wings. They have leather vests and roaring engines, and they ride through the darkness to answer the cries that no one else will hear. If you believe that true heroes are defined by their actions, not their appearance, share this story. Let the world know that even in the darkest corners, there are those who ride for the fallen, who fight for the silenced, and who prove that family is not about blood, but about the loyalty you forge in the fire. Support your local survivors of domestic abuse, and remember the courage it takes to ask for help.